The High Council chamber of the Cathar hegemony was not designed for comfort, but for the articulation of absolute power, its obsidian walls rising into a vault that dissolved into a manufactured constellation of strategic light points, each representing a sector under their dominion. And tonight, the vast space felt less like a seat of governance and more like the claustrophobic confines of a coffin. Beneath the immense, silent gaze of the star charts, the assembled delegates, representatives from the core worlds of the hegemony, the Zidonian Conclave's permanent observer, and the silent, shimmering envoy of the distant Velian Combine, were gripped by a tension that manifested not in shouting, but in the oppressive stillness of held breath, the air thick with the scent of ozone and the subtle, bitter tang of fear sweat from species whose physiology rarely admitted to such base reactions. High Proctor Valerius, his segmented carapace humming faintly with suppressed agitation, stood at the central plinth, his 6 optical clusters fixed upon the single, flickering red data point that pulsed within the otherwise stable green field of the Ethel sector display, the nightmare world known to all cartographers simply as Xylos. Xylos, the name, a guttural exhalation in the Cathar tongue, had become synonymous with catastrophic failure, a strategic anomaly that defied the hegemony's foundational principles of systematic conquest and controlled expansion. It was a planet of impossibly dense, hyper-aggressive jungle, a swirling, oceanic canopy that masked a biome of singular, lethal intent. Expeditionary forces, numbering in the hundreds of thousands across cycles, had vanished without trace, their advanced sensor networks silenced not by conventional weaponry, but by the very act of landing. The planet did not merely possess toxic flora or dangerous fauna. Xylos possessed a decentralized, organic-mechanical intelligence that treated any non-native presence as a systemic infection to be methodically, universally eradicated. The Zidonian Conclave had lost an entire colonization fleet, their biosynthetic bodies dissolved by airborne spores that could bypass plasma shielding, while the Cathar's elite Iron Legions had been strangled, their power armor breached by impossibly fast, crystalline root structures that grew through hull plating within minutes. Xylos was the hegemony's shame, the proof that the universe was not merely a set of resources to be managed, but an unpredictable, fundamentally hostile entity that occasionally manifested an unsurvivable complexity. We have reviewed the final cycle reports from the Hesperus installation, Proctor Valerius, stated Ambassador Vrel, the senior diplomatic representative whose long, slender limbs betrayed the intellectual rather than martial caste of her bloodline, her voice a low, resonant thrum that nonetheless cut through the chamber's silence. The environmental assimilation rate exceeded all predictive models by a factor of 600. The planet absorbed the entire infrastructure, the defensive plasma grid, the automated fabrication network, and the 3,000 personnel in less than 17 orbital rotations. It did not destroy the outpost, it recycled it. There were no survivors, not a single intelligible transmission, only the sound of rock drill mandibles fusing with bioacoustic filters. The conclusion remains immutable. Xylos cannot be colonized, cannot be defended against, and must be designated an inviolable exclusion zone. The loss of life has become an unacceptable drain on hegemonic resources and morale. A ripple of assent passed through the assembled delegates, a faint, metallic clicking sound that spoke of weary agreement. Xylos was to be abandoned, a cosmic wound cauterized by bureaucratic decree. This decision, however, was predicated on the hegemony's belief that all known species adhered to the same rational, self-preservatory calculus. But the universe, as the past stellar cycle had demonstrated with unnerving clarity, had introduced a variable that defied their every principle of logic and self-preservation. The species identified through fragmented data streams as human, or the Sol Confederacy. Proctor Valerius extended a sensory probe, illuminating a second, smaller and disturbingly proximal data point near the periphery of the Xylos exclusion zone. The matter of the exclusion zone is complicated by the presence of the newcomers, he stated, the rasp in his voice escalating. We have issued the standard, universally recognized Class Delta warning, a full ban on approach, citing lethal ecological risk and non-intervention protocol concerning rogue biospheres. Their response, received through the only viable frequency they seemed to acknowledge, was, he paused, a visible shudder running through his carapace, the silence stretching into an eternity of diplomatic terror. Was a single transmission of 11 standard cycle words, repeated on a Loop, we have received the warning. Intervention is proceeding. Prepare for collateral observation. The chamber erupted, not in sound, but in a chaotic, silent shift of body language. Claws retracting into sheaths, optical sensors dilating, the Velian envoy's shimmering form momentarily destabilizing. Intervention. Against Xylos. The term in the context of the killer jungle could only mean one of two things: unparalleled, suicidal arrogance or an incomprehensible, terrifying depth of ignorance. The Cathar, Zidonian, and Velian histories were littered with species that had fought nature, and every single one of those species now existed only as petrified fossils on the ruins of their homeworlds. "They are primitives," hissed Delegate Cathara, her voice a sharp, high-pitched static. "Their historical records, those we managed to intercept, show a propensity for internal conflict and a remarkable inability to manage their own atmosphere. They have been active in the galactic sphere for only the briefest flicker of a cycle. They cannot possibly comprehend the nature of the Xylos entity. They view the universe through the lens of conquest and dominion, a juvenile concept. They will land, they will fail, and the subsequent biological counterreaction could spread a contaminated ecological signature across the entire sector. This is not mere self-destruction. It is an act of galactic negligence. Proctor, we must deploy the deterrence flotilla and compel them to withdraw." "Compulsion is complicated by their previous erratic performance," Valerius countered, his voice now lower, colder. "Their vessels are few in number, structurally simplistic, yet they exhibit a singular, unnerving defensive capability. The engagement over the Tannhäuser debris field, a minor, forgotten incident that should have ended with their immediate surrender, resulted in the unexpected, non-hostile deactivation of 3 of our scouting frigates. Their methods are alien to our doctrine. They did not fire kinetic weapons or launch plasma torpedoes. They employed a targeted, non-lethal electromagnetic pulse that neutralized our propulsion systems with surgical precision, then simply waited until we re-engaged power and withdrew. They are not warlike in the manner we comprehend. They are," he trailed off, searching for the appropriate term in the complex lexicon of hegemonic strategy. "They are clinicians on the battlefield. They do not seek annihilation, they seek control." Ambassador Vrel raised a hand, her movement fluid and deliberate, an oasis of calm in the rising storm of political anxiety. "The humans present a strategic paradox that cannot be resolved through brute force. They are small, yet their capacity for targeted action is immense. They lack fear, which is not courage, but a fundamental misunderstanding of risk, or perhaps a redefinition of it. The question before us is not if we can force them to withdraw, but why they refuse. No species with access to the data we have shared, the full unexpurgated tragedy of Xylos, would consciously elect to land there. Yet they are not only landing, they are preparing to wage war against the planet, as their own data streams term it. War against an ecosystem. It is a terrifying concept. It suggests either profound madness or a technological and philosophical leap that renders our concept of ecological warfare obsolete." She gestured toward the distant, faint image of the human vessel on the main display, a dark, angular monolith that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. "I propose a final diplomatic initiative, a face-to-face. We must understand the nature of their intervention before Xylos, in its inevitable defense mechanism, extinguishes them. If they are destroyed, their wreckage and technology will be absorbed by the planetary entity, exponentially increasing the lethality of the exclusion zone. If they succeed, and I state that possibility only for the sake of abstract logic, then the hegemony must immediately understand the principles of that success. Proctor Valerius, I request authorization to lead the diplomatic mission. We must look into the face of this strange, quiet race and demand the logic behind their insanity." Valerius, after a long, silent moment of internal computation, gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The decision was not driven by hope, but by the cold mathematics of self-interest. The risk of allowing the humans to proceed unchecked was greater than the risk of engaging them in direct, potentially destabilizing conversation. The fate of the ethos sector, and perhaps the philosophical integrity of the hegemony itself, now rested on the capacity of one diplomatic envoy to decipher the terrifying calm of the human mind. The meeting was authorized. The stage was set. A small, quiet vessel named the Dauntless Logic orbiting the most hostile world in the known galaxy, patiently waiting for the hegemony to make its approach. Ambas, Sador Vrel's diplomatic vessel, the Sovereign's Quill, was a testament to Cathar architectural philosophy. Every curve was designed to convey elegant stability, every light source meticulously calibrated to enhance the natural iridescence of the Cathar carapace, projecting an atmosphere of serene, unquestionable authority. Yet, as they approached the operational perimeter of the human vessel, the dauntless logic, the intended psychological effect withered into a faint, aesthetic vanity. The human ship was, by contrast, brutal in its functionality, a mass of stark, matte black composite plating angled with no regard for beauty or grace, only for the efficient dispersal of energy and the minimization of sensor signature. It did not shine. It simply existed, a shadow against the emerald green horror of Xylos below. The human vessel made the sovereign's quill feel baroque, excessively decorated, and ultimately vulnerable. Vrel monitored the approach from her command position. The low thrum of the ion drives the only sound. Her internal bioindicators registered a heightened state of alert, a biological response she had not experienced since her first, terrifying negotiation with the unpredictable, methane-breathing species of the Outer Rim. The humans were worse. Their psychology was a closed book, their motivations opaque. They had responded to the hegemony's request for a face-to-face with unnerving brevity. We acknowledge. Sending coordinates for Dock Link. One delegation member only, necessary for security protocols. No posturing, no demands for military deference, no flowery diplomatic preamble, just the cold, simple calculus of necessity. "We are establishing the Docklink sequence, Ambassador," reported the ship's navigator, his voice tight. "Their signal transmission is unusually clean. Minimal noise, immediate data transmission, no security sweeps detected. They appear to be completely uninterested in our systems." Vrel extended a digit and tapped the main display, zooming in on the docking port of the dauntless logic. It was a simple, pressurized lock, unadorned and purely utilitarian. "They are not uninterested, Navigator. They are confident. They believe their mission renders our political or military posturing irrelevant. Prepare the transfer chamber. I will proceed alone as requested. Transmit the standard diplomatic cipher and ensure the hegemony's ethical commitment to non-aggression is the primary broadcast frequency." The airlock hissed open, bathing Vrel in the cold, synthetic light of the human ship. The interior was sterile, quiet, and strangely odorless. Cathar vessels carried the faint, comforting smell of ionized metals and biological lubricants. Human vessels smelled of nothing, a null environment that felt profoundly unnatural to a species accustomed to a constant, rich data stream of olfactory information. Vrel proceeded down a long, narrow corridor, her multi-jointed feet clicking softly against the reinforced deck plating. The design spoke of practicality, not luxury, a tool built for a specific, difficult purpose. She arrived at a plain, unlabeled door that slid open to reveal a small conference chamber, dominated by a large, circular observation port that offered a stomach-lurching view of the churning, malevolent clouds of Xylos. Seated at the table, alone, was the individual identified as Captain Eva Rostova, the commanding officer of the dauntless logic. The human woman was startlingly unremarkable, unprotected by armor, unaccompanied by retinue, wearing a uniform of simple gray fabric. Her features were symmetrical, her expression calm to the point of being unsettling. She rose as Vrel entered, a small, polite gesture that Vrel's cultural database identified as a mark of respect, yet felt strangely empty of genuine emotion. "Ambassador Vrel of the Cathar hegemony," Captain Rostova stated, her voice even, modulated and professional, devoid of the theatrical weight Vrel was accustomed to in diplomatic settings. "Welcome to the dauntless logic. Please be seated." Vrel took her place, her compound eyes momentarily distracted by the human's hands, which rested on the table, smooth, fragile-looking, yet the hegemony's data had logged these same hands operating machinery capable of surgical, terrifying destruction. "Captain Rostova," Vrel began, cutting directly to the core of the crisis, abandoning the standard half-cycle of introductory pleasantries. "The hegemony appreciates your compliance with this emergency meeting. However, we are not here to exchange protocols. We are here to address your impending, inexplicable, and potentially catastrophic intervention on the planet designated Xylos." Rostova's gaze was steady, her eyes the color of a deep, calm blue that seemed to take in and process every minute detail of Vrel's posture and equipment. "Ambassador, your apprehension is noted and frankly expected. We received your Class Delta warnings, your data PA. Seekets detailing the loss of hegemonic assets and personnel, and the Zidonian report. Our own analysis concurred with your core finding. Xylose is universally lethal to all known carbon silicate and biosynthetic life forms attempting planetary integration. Then why, Vrel pressed, the restraint in her voice beginning to fray, are you preparing for what your own internal communications term a planetary pacification, a war against a biological entity? This is not a war, Captain. It is suicide. You are condemning your vessel and your entire detachment. Worse, you risk contaminating the galactic community with whatever bioagent Xylose generates from your absorbed remains. The hegemony demands an immediate cessation of your operations and a withdrawal from the ethel sector. Rostova leaned forward, her expression shifting slightly, moving from neutrality to a look of detached, almost academic concern. Ambassador Vrel, I perceive a fundamental philosophical disconnect. Your hegemony views Xylose as a natural disaster, a force of nature that is insurmountable, inevitable, and therefore deserving of reverence through avoidance. You see a hostile ecosystem. She paused, allowing the gravity of her next statement to settle. We see a disease. Vrel tilted her head, a gesture of deep cultural confusion. Disease? It is a planet, Captain. It has consumed fleets. It has dissolved your predecessors into basic organic compounds. It operates on a planetary scale. It is the very definition of a terminal environmental threat. Precisely, Rostova confirmed, nodding slowly. And a terminal threat demands a cure, not a surrender. Your species studied Xylose through the lens of warfare, how to assault it, how to defend against it, how to colonize despite it. You sought tactical solutions to a strategic problem. We approached Xylose through the lens of systemic pathology. We did not ask, how do we fight this? We asked, what is the function of this entity? What is its operational code? And what is the most efficient method of neutralization? She turned slightly, indicating the swirling jungle planet outside the observation port. Xylose is not a naturally evolved environment. It is a hyper-evolved, purpose-built biosynthetic defensive system. Its core directive is not growth, but exclusion. Every spore, every root structure, every atmospheric distortion is a function of a decentralized, planet-spanning cybernetic biological network. You attempted to fight a shield. We have identified the central processor. The revelation struck Vrel with the force of a plasma discharge. The entire premise of the hegemony's 20-cycle struggle, the countless lives lost, the philosophical debates about the limits of ambition, had been fundamentally flawed. They had been fighting the symptoms, not the cause. A defensive system, Vrel repeated, the concept a cold, heavy lump in her consciousness. Engineered? By whom? And if it is a system, it is designed to repel something. What entity could compel the creation of such a perfect, lethal quarantine? Rostova held up a single finger, indicating that the question was valid but secondary. The origin is part of the ongoing investigation, Ambassador. The primary objective is the pacification, our term for the cure. And here is the deeper disconnect, Vrel. Your hegemony saw our small fleet, our non-conventional approach, and concluded we were either desperate or primitive. You underestimated us because our war posture is quiet. Our approach to planetary conflict is not with kinetic force, but with data. The captain's voice dropped slightly, becoming almost a whisper, yet carrying the weight of total, terrifying authority. The Cathar sought to dominate the biosphere. The humans intend to edit it. Your fleets brought plasma and armor. We brought the logic. She tapped a small, unlabeled panel on the table. Our war is a systemic, phased deployment of self-replicating, molecular disassembler nanites, coded to target the specific, non-native protein sequences that form the Xylose entity's command and control network. We are not bombarding the planet. We are introducing an algorithm that will rewrite the planet's directive from exclusion to inertia. We will remove the lethality and leave the ecosystem intact. Vrel felt a primal, cold dread, not fear of the humans' power, but fear of their mind. To view an entire world as a computational problem, to wage war not with explosions, but with biological code. It transcended the boundaries of every known military doctrine. It was an application of power so clean, so purely logical, that it felt profoundly unethical to the Cathar's more passionate, kinetic nature. They were not warriors. They were, as Valerius had suggested, cosmic clinicians, and they treated existence itself as a sterile operating theater. "And if you fail, Captain?" Vrel asked, her voice regaining its steady diplomatic texture, hiding the shock beneath layers of formal compo. "Sure, if your algorithm is rejected by the entity and mutates into something exponentially worse." Rostova's expression did not change. Ambassador, we have anticipated the rejection vector. The Dauntless logic is equipped with a tertiary payload designed for immediate controlled atmospheric ignition, vaporizing the planet to the mantle, which would neutralize the threat permanently. Our protocols are designed to ensure that the risk to the galactic community is zero. That is the human commitment to ethical intervention, calculated risk, minimized collateral, and absolute fail-safes. We will not allow the disease to spread. The calm delivery of the threat of planetary annihilation was, paradoxically, the most terrifying display of ethical power Vrel had ever witnessed. It was not a boast, nor a passionate vow. It was a simple mathematical statement of contingency. We begin Phase 1 in 1 standard hour, Rostova concluded, rising to signal the end of the meeting. I encourage you to observe the process from your vessel, Ambassador. Your perspective on planetary security is about to undergo a necessary revision. We are not waging a war of conquest here, Vrel. We are waging a war of responsibility. The observation period that followed was, for Ambassador Vrel and the nervous crew of the Sovereign's Quill, a period of profound philosophical and military re-education. They had retreated to a safe, mandated distance, watching the dauntless logic hold its position, a silent, dark sentinel against the emerald horror of Xylos. The hegemony expected a grand, theatrical display of force, a massive energy discharge, a heavy orbital bombardment to soften the planetary defenses, the kind of overwhelming kinetic violence that characterized every successful Cathar engagement. What they witnessed was nothing less than a spiritual and intellectual shock. There was no sound, no flash, no energy weapon signature. At the designated time, the monitors, tuned to the full-spectrum sensor readings, registered a subtle, almost imperceptible event. A cascade of millions upon millions of microsignatures erupted from the dauntless logic, not beams of energy, but an atmospheric deployment of the specialized nanite payload, disseminated with such fine precision that the hegemony's sensor nets initially dismissed the readings as atmospheric interference. These were the molecular disassemblers, the algorithmic cure, delivered to the planetary surface like an orbital dust cloud. Vrel watched the surface scans with a growing sense of dread-filled awe. The planet did not explode, the jungle did not instantly wither. Instead, the effect began internally with the silent, insidious efficiency of a systemic infection. The Cathar bioscanners, calibrated to detect surges of aggressive organic activity, began to register a different kind of spike, data activity. The Xylos network, previously a chaotic, white noise wall of lethal intention, was now battling an internal conflict against the human-coded nanites. The planetary defense systems are engaging the payload, the Sovereign's Quill's lead science officer whispered, his voice hushed. The crystalline root structures, the ones that breached the Iron Legion's armor, they are attempting to absorb the nanites and turn them against the source. But the human code is resistant. It's a distributed, self-mutating algorithm. The nanites are not being killed. They are being reprogrammed by the planetary network, and then they are instantly re-reprogrammed by the human control signature. It is a biological cybernetic war being waged at the cellular level. The battle raged in silence over the course of the next 48 standard cycles, visible only through the shifting patterns of bioacoustic distortion and the slow, agonizing change in the planet's optical spectrum. The emerald green of the jungle canopy, once vibrant with lethal energy, began to subtly, uniformly dull, fading into an inert, lifeless olive. The violent, hyperaccelerated growth patterns, the essence of Xylos' defense, slowed to a geologic crawl. Vrel watched, sleepless, her mind grappling with the impossible implications. The humans did not fight systems, they optimized them. They did not conquer nature, they rewrote it. The simplicity of their method, pure, cold, clinical data delivery, was terrifying because it suggested an intellect that had moved beyond the limitations of passion and brute force. They were the ultimate expression of the principle of minimum effective dose. Then came the second, equally unnerving action, the deployment of the cleanse payload. From the dauntless logic, a smaller series of vessels were launched, sleek, silent atmospheric shuttles that dipped into the upper atmosphere. These were not carrying bombs or kinetic suppressors. They were carrying a targeted atmospheric counteragent designed to neutralize only the now inert, but still toxic, chemical byproducts of the nanite. Warfare, the goal was not merely to defeat Xylos, but to leave a clean system behind. They are ensuring the integrity of the ecosystem, Vrel muttered, the realization heavy with irony. They waged war to preserve the planet, simply removing the planetary aggression. They are not destroyers, they are caretakers with the capacity for total annihilation. After 3 cycles of methodical, silent work, Captain Rostova transmitted a short, unprompted message. Pacification phase complete. Xylo's entity neutralized. Planetary environment stable. Surface landing is now viable. We recommend a full Cathar hegemony science team be deployed for analysis and confirmation of inert state. Logic dictates joint data acquisition. The effect back on the Hegemony Council was immediate and total. The news of the human success, the silent, surgical defeat of the ultimate environmental horror, rendered the previous atmosphere of fear and arrogance utterly moot. Xylos was no longer a symbol of hegemonic failure, but a demonstration of human capability that had rewritten the laws of galactic intervention. Ambassador Vrel, now acting as the lead liaison, organized the joint science team. The Cathar delegation, clad in their heaviest environment suits and escorted by armored drones, finally landed on the surface of Xylos. The environment was oppressive, damp, hot, and suffocatingly silent, but the lethal aggression was gone. The immense cathedral-like crystalline root structures were still standing, but they were brittle, inert, their complex energy conduits shut down. The aggressive bioacoustics were replaced by the gentle, ordinary sounds of wind and falling moisture. The planet was now a normal, hostile jungle, challenging, but no longer a bioengineered executioner. Vrel met Captain Rostova on the surface, beneath the oppressive canopy. Rostova stood calmly in a simple environmental suit, observing the inert jungle with a scientist's detachment. "You succeeded," Vrel stated, the observation unnecessary, the weight of the achievement pressing down on her. "You have achieved what the collective military and scientific might of the hegemony deemed impossible. You waged war against a planet and won without a single casualty or a single act of kinetic violence. The hegemony's entire philosophical framework of expansion must now be reevaluated." Rostova's voice, modulated by her suit's comms, was calm. "Ambassador, your species made a categorization error. You defined Xylos as an absolute entity, a force that must be either bowed to or destroyed. We defined it as a complex problem that required a specific, tailored solution. Our war was not against the planet, but against the problem state it represented. We do not engage in war for the sake of destruction, but for the sake of correction." "Correction," Vrel repeated, tasting the cold, clinical word. "And what does the data tell you now that the defensive system is neutralized? Who built this perfect weapon, and what were they defending against?" Rostova turned, her shielded gaze meeting Vrel's. "That, Ambassador, is the real reason we risked this engagement. The surface was merely the mechanism. The core is the secret." The joint human Cathar analysis team descended into the planet's core, a subterranean network of chambers that had previously been sealed by the biological cybernetic network of Xylos. What they found was not a geological formation, but an immense, abandoned technological vault, perfectly preserved beneath layers of inert, hyperdense organic armor. The Xylos defense system was revealed to be the final, automated, multi-cycle expression of a dying civilization. The core chamber was vast, lit by ambient, self-sustaining plasma conduits, and dominated by a central plinth that held a single, massive crystalline structure, the central processing unit of the planetary defense system, now silenced by the human algorithm. As the human and Cathar scientists, working in unnerving, complementary silence, began to extract the ancient data, the magnitude of the larger twist began to unfold. The civilization, identified only through abstract glyphs as the Veiled Architects, had not constructed Xylos to defend against rival empires, nor against natural catastrophe. They had built it as a quarantine zone, a final, perfect biological seal. The data streamed onto the hegemonic and Sol Confederacy systems simultaneously, an ancient, terrifying narrative. The Veiled Architects had encountered an entity far beyond their technological capacity, a cosmic, abstract, non-sentient pathogen that spread not through contact, but through the transmission of pure, destabilizing data structures, capable of corrupting the foundational logic and psychological integrity of any advanced, network-dependent species. It was a disease of the mind and the system. It was not hostile in the conventional sense. It simply was, and its presence created madness, war, and eventual destruction in those it touched. The architects had fought an internal war that spanned thousands of cycles, a war against the inevitable psychological corruption, a war against a concept they could barely articulate. They realized the only way to save the rest of the galaxy was to isolate themselves. They had constructed Xylos, the perfect bioweapon, a final, lethal barrier to protect the universe from their own inevitable failure and the spread of the data pathogen. The final encrypted message from the architects, translated by the human systems, was a somber, self-sacrificial testament. We have sealed the scar. Do not open the wound. We failed to cure ourselves. We offer our final, lethal quarantine to the stars beyond. Let the veil fall. And then the true climax. Deep within the Xylos core, the human analysts discovered a faint, long-dormant signal emitter, shielded by layers of veiled architect technology. It was not a warning. It was a directional beacon. It was pointing outwards through the galactic plane toward a massive, anomalous region of interstellar dust and dark matter that the Cathar hegemony had always designated the Veil, an area traditionally ignored as strategically irrelevant. The Xylos entity was not fighting us, Rostova stated, her voice quiet but carrying immense weight in the now-silent chamber. It was fulfilling its core programming, defending the beacon. The architects did not just seal themselves in. They left a breadcrumb trail for a species they hoped might one day have the conceptual framework to understand and cure what they could only contain. The Xylos jungle was merely the lock on an ancient, cosmic door. Vrel, standing before the ancient beacon, felt the sheer magnitude of cosmic time and tragedy press upon her. The hegemony's arrogance, their belief that they were the center of all conflicts, had been shattered. They were merely the inheritors of an ancient, terrible battlefield. The humans, Vrel whispered, the realization coming with the force of a religious conversion. You did not arrive here by accident. You recognized the pattern, you saw the scar. Stova met her gaze, a flicker of something almost like weary respect entering her eyes. Ambassador, humanity's history is a record of internal wars against abstract concepts, against madness, against famine, against the internal corrosion of logical thought. We have fought our own data pathogens across centuries. We survived our own veil. When we saw the data on Xylos, the perfect, self-cannibalizing, biological cybernetic defense, it resonated with a deep, collective cultural memory. We did not come to conquer Xylos. We came to validate the architects' fears, to confirm the threat they died protecting us from. We understood the nature of their failure. The chamber grew heavy with the weight of the galactic unknown. The entire reason for the hegemony's fear of the humans, their terrifying, quiet capacity for war, their cold logic, their lack of passion, was now revealed as the very trait that the universe desperately required. The humans were the only species capable of waging war against concept. The hegemony sought to avoid Xylos, Vrel said, turning to address the gathered Cathar and human personnel. We saw a challenge to our power and prestige. The Sol Confederacy saw a patient in need of an invasive ethical surgery, and now we see the true enemy waiting in the silence beyond the veil. The conflict is no longer about territory or resources. It is about the fundamental integrity of consciousness. Rostova extended her hand, a simple, unexpected gesture. Ambassador, the Cathar hegemony possesses immense structural stability, organizational capacity, and martial fortitude. The Sol Confederacy possesses the necessary algorithmic framework and the unique psychological resilience to confront this specific, abstract threat. The architects failed because they fought the disease in isolation. The hegemony and the Confederacy will not make that mistake. The war for the Veil is not a conflict of species, but a defense of sanity. Unity is the only logical path forward. Vrel grasped the human's hand, the contact a formal seal on an alliance forged not in shared triumph, but in the shared terror of a cosmic, existential realization. The hegemony had underestimated the humans as warmongers, only to discover they were something far more terrifying and necessary. The galaxy's reluctant, profoundly logical physicians, willing to wage the necessary, difficult, and silent wars against the universe's fundamental imperfections. The Cathar Council Chamber, once dedicated to strategic fear, would now become the planning center for a war against the abstract, led by the only species willing to weaponize responsibility. The jungle planet was survived, not by fleeing its wrath, but by the cold, surgical application of superior logic. No species survived the jungle planet's fury until humanity, in its terrifying calm, decided to wage war, not on the planet, but on the very idea of its lethal isolation, opening the way to a silent, cosmic confrontation that only the quiet logic of the dauntless logic was prepared to face. The final reflection, heavy in Vrel's mind as she looked out toward the distant, black smear of the veil, was this: Humanity was not merely different. They were the necessary variable, the terrifying, calm cure for a universe that had begun to rot at the root of its own logic, and the hegemony was now irrevocably bound to their terrifying, essential purpose.